Anti-Semitism has always been the canary in the coal mine, the warning sign that democracy is in danger. It's more than 75 years since the end of the Second World War and the Holocaust. And to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day, we're here in the European Parliament. We'll speak with a Holocaust survivor about his experience and about resilience. And we'll also discuss the lessons which still need to be learned about the Holocaust and how anti-Semitism can be challenged in Europe. We're joined today by MEP from Sweden, Charlie Weimers, and Avi Tawil, the director of the European Jewish Community Centre. Dr. Tamas Halmos, a Holocaust survivor in Hungary. He was online with us also. And here in the studio with me is his daughter, Andrea Halmos. She's a European civil servant here in Brussels. Just before we hear from all of our panellists today, we're going to play a short video of about 3 minutes to give some background to Dr. Halmos' experience in Budapest.
Az én apám az első generációs értelmiségi volt, ha ezt szabadna mondanom. Ő fogorvos volt, aki szegény családból származott. Az ő édesapja, akit én nem ismertem, az hentes és mészáros volt, aztán egy kocsmát üzemeltetett. Beiratkozott az egyetemre Budapestre, ahol 2 évet végzett, és utána kitört az első világháború, és akkor 4 évig egyetem helyett a lövészárokban volt. Szeretett volna igazában bőrgyógyász lenni, de arra már nem volt pénze, se neki, se a családnak, senkinek, így aztán fogorvos lett, mert ebből gondolta ő is, meg a család is, hogy hamarabb tud pénzt keresni. És akkor az édesanyámmal azt hiszem, hogy ilyen családkereső szolgálat, ugye, hogy hívták ezeket, Sátyem, vagy zsidó úri éberül, te jobban fogod tudni. Tehát mindegy, szóval így ismerkedtek meg anyámmal, végül is. És ott a Horthy időben a 33-tól mondjuk 40-41-ig viszonylag jól élhettünk. Egyre több megszorítás volt, ezt inkább utólag tudom már. 1944. március 19-ig, amikor a németek bejöttek, én emlékszem, édesapámmal voltam a belvárosban moziba, jöttünk ki a moziból, és akkor már mindenütt német katonák párosával cirkáltak. Nem is tudtuk első pillanatban, hogy miről van szó, aztán persze rövidesen kiderült, és az első rendeletek egyike volt, hogy a zsidóknak össze kell gyűlni úgynevezett csillagos házakba. Ők semmit nem tettek. Szóval ez egy borzasztó dolog. Annak, aki mint én is végigéltem ezeket az éveket, az antiszemitizmus éveit, majd a nyilas uralom éveit, a náci megszállása, és láttam azt, hogy jó, a nácik után jött minden létre, de a magyar nép döntő többsége ezt vagy támogatta, vagy legjobb esetben közömbös volt. Nagyon kevesen voltak azok, akik aktívan tettek valamit, elbújtattak, stb. Vagy akár értékeket elrejtettek és visszaadták. Nem sokan voltak. Tér, ami annak idején ugye hát egy rettenetesen temető jellegű volt, ugye a halottakkal együtt. Ma ez egy nagyon kulturált, békés, tele zölddel, mindennel gondozott térnek a benyomását adja. Hát ez talán reményt ad arra nekem, és főleg az utánam következő generációknak, hogy az, ami 1944-45 telén megtörtént, soha többé nem fog előfordulni és megtörténni.
Dr. Halmos, first of all, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have you with us on the program today. One of the things that strikes me most is that we always expect in the worst times our community, those that we live with, they'll stand up, they'll defend us. And in your case, you would have hoped they would have hidden you, they would have taken you in and assisted in some way. Why do you think your parents' friends, those good friends, they didn't help, they didn't reach out?
You know, probably they were afraid of retaliation, which could have had happened if they would, let us say, try to hide me. So it was life-threatening, dangerous. to hide persons. Much better they were very kind because they took away some jewelries or money or any other values. But to hide a person, a little boy as I was, that was life dangerous. So I can't condemn there because I understand their fear. Because of having a certain fear or for a retaliation, which could happen if they would be, let us say, openly, let us say, somebody would tell that they hired a Jewish guy and so on. So I understand it, and I think that was the maximum what they could do. I know that there were people who even have done this life-threatening act that they hide some persons, but that was very rare in Hungary, so far as I know.
This is something that struck me also, is that you speak about the indifference of people. Now, fear is one thing, indifference is something else. You know, why were people so indifferent? Do you think it was driven by fear, or do you think that people were just, there's a selfishness there which it was based on anti-Semitism in Hungary at the time?
No, I think they, first of all, the friends of my father and mother, they were quite very good people. They were just afraid. They was just afraid because of, as I told you, the retaliation. So that was nothing else, nothing more. So they didn't want, they couldn't do that they hide because they were afraid, and that's all, nothing else.
Okay, and one other thing is that you know, these are the friends of your family, and you explained how
Yes.
they may have behaved. But there were others. There's another film I think I saw you comment about women in public transport uniforms encouraging police to kill Jews in the street rather than bother walking them to the
That's
Danube.
a different thing. As a little boy, I realized it, and I have seen and heard. We were taking to the river, to the Danube, and the people who stood on the two sides of the road, of the street, they were telling that why do you take them to the Danube? Why don't you kill them, and why don't you shoot them here? So that's unfortunately, really, that's the truth. I don't say that everybody was so envious against the Jewish people, but they were very loud, and the crowd, they formed the nucleus of the crowd, and the general tendency in that time was to kill and the Jews as it possible. So do not want, they didn't want to do anything in protecting the Jewish people, for instance. So unfortunately, that was the tendency in 44 December in Budapest.
Okay. You're a doctor and you've treated many diseases. You see anti-Semitism as a disease which has a virulent aspect to it as well. Do you think there's a treatment for this today? Is there something we're missing in how we deal with anti-Semitism today?
Well, anti-Semitism is in everywhere in Europe. I think it's since many centuries. And in Hungary, I think that the anti-Semitism has started in the religion, because I remember when I was 6 years old and I started the first elementary school, and then we were separated, the Christian people, Christian boys and the Jewish. And when we finished the first religion lesson and we came again to the corridor and we met the other guys, then a boy, a schoolmate, came to me and told me, "You have crucified Jesus." So I didn't understand, because in that time I was not aware who was Jesus and what happened 2,000 years ago. But I just want to tell you that that was the very first act that the anti-Semitism in my life started. Of course, there were many other things, the different clothing, the different feasts, and everything was different. However, in Hungary, the Jewish people were more or less not the religious, not Orthodox. They were the so-called neolog Jewish people who were very similar to the average Hungarian population in clothing and everything.
Okay.
And in spite of that, we were a bit different. And because of having different costumes and different clothing and so on, everything, the hate against the different people was enormous, increasing in those days.
I come from Northern Ireland. We have our own hatred of individual religions there as well. If you were Jewish in Northern Ireland, you'd have to decide if you were a Catholic Jew or a Protestant Jew, because we don't accept anything else in those terms. Let me just ask MEP Charlie Weimers, we see the rise of anti-Semitism again. How do we deal with this, and why have we failed to learn the lessons of the Holocaust?
I think that we need to do three things mainly. We need to counter both violent and non-violent extremism in any shape or form, whether it's inside our own political parties from left to right, or if it's outside in civic society and organizations that promote anti-Semitism. But I also think that we need to uphold the memory of those who fell victims of the Holocaust and the legacy of Jewry in Europe. Opinion polls show that the young generation is increasingly unaware of the Holocaust, and that needs to be countered both through education and more active remembrance, such as school trips, such as the one I did to Sachsenhausen in Brandenburg, Germany, or meeting with Jewish communities or with Holocaust survivors as long as it is possible. The third point I wanted to raise concerns human dignity. And because one of the things I see in today's anti-Semitism, well, Dr. Halmos also saw it, I'm quite sure of, is how Jews are portrayed as either superhuman or subhuman, depending on who you're asking. How do you counter that? Well, through human dignity, I think. Through the idea of human dignity and it being a part of the hearts and mind of Europeans. In my case, I remember very well how a Holocaust survivor visited our school and told us about his story and how it affected me. As a kid, I didn't read the Bible, so I had no idea about, human dignity coming from the idea of us as humans being created in God's image. But he taught me something about human dignity that vaccinated me as an individual against anti-Semitism. There was a human, just like me, who went through this living hell. And if we don't protect our freedom and our rights, this could happen to anyone, Jew or non-Jew. So that was important for me. And if we think about today, January 27th, and realize that a lot of youngsters, they don't know hardly anything about the Holocaust, what could we do? Well, bring them on Twitter. Bring them to the Holocaust Memorial account, which shows the names and faces and personal stories of those who perished in...
personalizing it. It's that you can't have a large group and identify with a large group and hope that message of humanity is going to cut through.
No, exactly. It's important to know the figure 6 million Jews, but you need to go beyond that.
Okay. Avi Tawil, Avi, you work here in Brussels, across Europe, and your experiences of a Jew living here as well, it's changed over the last few years as well. How do you find that the Jewish community in Europe is finding itself under more pressure?
I can tell you only about the Jewish community in Hungary.
Let me ask Avi Tawil, and then we'll come back to you in just a moment, Dr. Halmos. No
Sorry,
problem.
I was wrong. Okay.
Yes, Brian, thank you. I think that we have a bright future. I think there are many challenges. Anti-Semitism is growing, but I'd like to focus also that in the fact that Jewish culture today is thriving in Europe, and I think more and more communities are working together to develop cultural projects, more education. So I see that not only that there is light in the end of the tunnel, but I think we have a bright future ahead of us. But we have to defend our freedoms. We have to stand for what we believe in, and so I think altogether we have a bright future.
Are you comfortable with how the European Union seeks to defend anti-Semitism, seeks to oppose anti-Semitism and defend the Jewish community, or do you think there's more that can be done?
So I think the institutions are doing great work to fight anti-Semitism, but I don't think that the solution comes only from government institutions. I think that the civil society, we need to raise more awareness in the streets, through education, in schools. And as the member of European Parliament, Weimers just mentioned, I think we have to meet each other, understand each other. We have to reach out to others who don't think like us, who don't celebrate like us, and try to start understanding each other. I think that it will bring a much faster solution than more legislation.
Okay. Andrea Halmos, you're the next generation, and you're a civil servant working here in Brussels with the European Union. You're here in individual capacity today. Your experience, what are you filled with, optimism or fear?
I think realistically looking at the situation, and after the Holocaust, there was a long period of time when we were all searching for the kind of way forward. And I think, for example, the changes in Central and Eastern Europe have given a great hope, and the European Commission and the European institutions are based on those values that we share, that were mentioned: human rights, people's dignity, rule of law, democracy. However, I think we cannot take it for granted. We have to continue strengthening this democracy, strengthening these values through education and through, for example, passing on the message from the previous generation. This is especially true, for example, for myself. Since I have my children, I've really felt that this is my responsibility to pass this message on. And also as a civil servant, we have a responsibility, just as bureaucracy had a big responsibility in creating all the underlying foundations of the Holocaust. We need to always see and question what we're doing, why we're doing, what's the bigger picture behind it. We all have a responsibility in this.
MP Weimer speaks about the need to teach this next generation as well. What do you think cuts through with kids? What do they understand? What touches them in a way which makes them understand and resonate in their emotions with others?
I think individual stories do. I think specific movies, I've seen actually Holocaust movies made for children through, for example, cartoons, and individual stories of children, such as like the Diaries of Anna Frank and so on. I think these things, when they can relate to something that could happen to them, makes them appreciate what they actually have and will be able to raise awareness on what we're trying to cherish.
We need to do more on this, don't we? We need to understand better what's missing and to have a clear strategy, because it seems to me most of the European messaging, most of what comes out of here as well, is focused on the adult population and those who are expressing themselves clearly on Twitter, on social media and others, and generating that hate. But the next generation needs to remember.
Yes, indeed, and it needs to understand also what goes on today when you hear incitements connected to, for instance, events in the Middle East, and that drives in turn violence against synagogues, as far away from the Middle East as Sweden. You need to talk about these things in a sober and educated manner already from a really, really young age. That, I think, is the responsibility of individual citizens, of parents. I'm a father myself, and I try to teach my kids about, already from a young age, about human dignity and what it means. because yeah, let's be frank. I think it's totally right that you cannot go from the top down only. Of course, Europe's countries adopt the definition of anti-Semitism, for instance, is hugely important, and it connects with the issue of the Middle East, and not least also. But we need to work on every front, not only to fight the symptoms as we do when we offer protection for Jewish elderly care homes, Jewish schools, kindergartens, like those I visited in Gothenburg. It was very sobering to go there and to see what security measures they had to have in place in order to feel secure. That is covering the symptoms, but you have to go to the source. And that's tough. It'll take time, but that should be our legacy to the future.
Dr. Halmos, do you think it's possible to prevent anti-Semitism?
I think, well, it's a very, very difficult task. Because it takes since approximately 2,000 years that anti-Semitism is always present. And unfortunately, sometimes it's very sharply increasing. How to manage and how to prevent it, I think the only thing is education. Education starting from the very, let us say, primary school, and then it needs a very tolerant atmosphere, which is unfortunately not in every community and in schools and kindergartens and so on at present in Hungary. So there are some problems, and I feel and I think that now open anti-Semitism is not forbidden, of course, but in the background, you can feel it not openly, but if somebody as me has survived these years in 44, 45 in Hungary, we feel at once that in some propaganda in the background, behind the open propaganda, there is some anti-Semitism. Why? Because the people are willing to accept it, because people everywhere, not only in Hungary, they are open for racism, for hate. They hate their neighbors, they hate the other people who have another skin color and so on. So anti-Semitism, to prevent it and to fight it definitely is a very, very important task, and maybe in the not in the very next future, but in the late future, maybe it will really fulfill and happen. I think that in one word, again, to sum up, education, and to try starting it from the very, very beginning, kindergarten and the primary school.
Thank you. Tawil, it's noticeable that the policy direction of challenging disinformation and fake news, the education process and starting early and critical thinking being taught in primary schools is key to that. I just note that often the politics of Israel and the Jewish community is often mixed together, and people, those who oppose Israel, tend to mix anti-Semitism with the policies of the Israeli government. And all the time I've known you, you've never spoken about politics, I have to say. You only speak about the Jewish community, the Jewish faith and people. And there was no state of Israel in 1944 when Dr. Halmos was persecuted. So this was something that existed before the politics of the state of Israel today as well. How do you see the education process in Europe? What needs to be done in the education process to deal with anti-Semitism, to deal with racism, and these other issues that we face today?
Yes, indeed. You said it very well. Critical thinking is one of the keys to be able to live in peace, with group culture and culture. This week we are celebrating the Jewish holiday for nature, and I think it has a very strong message in this matter for the question you're asking now. We all have spiritual truth or things we hold dearly for ourselves, ideological or religious. Nevertheless, Tu B'Shvat, the holiday for nature, tells us to converge with reality. We cannot just live in our own minds. At one point, we have to look out to the world and connect to the seasons, to the other human beings who are living around us. The Talmud mentions that compromise, yes, when two people have a disagreement and they get to a rational agreement, it stands higher than justice. Because justice just cut through. There is a white and black. There is a negative and positive. But compromise is something greater. I think today we have to learn. We have to get better at this.
Okay.
At listening to each other, understanding you see what's the argument of the other. I think how do you say, strengthening the muscle of understanding each other will bring more resilience to our system.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick word from both of you before we finish up. Andrea, resilience, making Europe more resilient against anti-Semitism, and in the context of improving European values as well. What's next?
It's already really important that we have a whole commission or DG focusing on these issues, the rule of law and values. I think what also needs to be understood and perhaps taken into account that anti-Semitism has not started with the camps. It started with small things like mocking and jokes and discrimination and so on. And these need to be stopped very, very early on. So we need to be aware, as I said, need to be grateful for democratic values, but need to keep on maintaining them. And we need to also understand that there's different forms of anti-Semitism. So we've talked about the religious form, we've talked about the racist form, but there's many others, like you've brought up the issue of perhaps double measures against Israel. All these need to be understood in the current context and need to be we need to search for appropriate ways to address these.
Thank you. And last words, MP Weimers, your message to the Jewish community on Holocaust Remembrance Day. What should Europe be doing, and what would you expect Europe to do now?
Europe should do everything it can in order for Jews to feel home in Europe. I'm especially concerned with regards to my own country, Sweden, and I will fight for all citizens of Sweden, including Jews, to feel safe on the streets and to be able to show the rest of society who they are openly. And I would like to end this by underlining the importance of seeing the human behind the figures, by quoting a poem that I saw when I visited Yad Vashem, Jerusalem, and it's by Benjamin Fontaine, murdered in Auschwitz in 1944. Remember only that I was innocent, and just like you, mortal on that day. I too had a face marked by rage, by pity and joy, quite simply a human face.
Thank you. On Holocaust Remembrance Day from the European Parliament, let me thank our guests, Charlie Weimers, Avi Tawil, Dr. Tamas Halmos, and Andrea Halmos also. I wish you a good day.